Welcome to Happily Ever After is just the beginning. Keeping your relationship not just together, but happy, and we mean truly happy, is part art and part science. You've come to the right place. Here's your host, Leslie Dories.
I used to lie a lot, and I try not to do it anymore, not even little white lies. And I've actually been on this path since I had children and also since I learned about radical honesty. Now, radical honesty is about being honest about everything. My thoughts, my feelings, where I've been, what I'm doing, what I want to do, my mistakes, all of it. Now, it hasn't been easy, and I haven't always been successful, but it is what I strive for. And it can be a struggle because honesty and transparency aren't really supported by society. Just think about how you answer the question, how are you? White lies and lies of omission to spare others are no less dishonest. So how can you be more honest, authentic, and transparent? Well, I'm really glad you asked, because writer Javier Ortega-Oraiza is here to share a few ways to get started. So Javier, thanks so much for being on the show and talking about something we say we all want, but many of us actually don't practice.
No, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
You wrote a piece, and a lot of my listeners will know, I actually write for the Good Men Project, and I also read a lot of my fellow writers. And you wrote a piece for them titled 3 Steps to Becoming Radically Transparent. And one of the first things you say is that most people lie. So why do we do that when we all don't like being lied to?
Yeah, well, I think it has to do with the perception that we're raised with, that we need to be approved by others all the time. So we grow up in a system where we always need to strive, struggle, both to be enough. You know, we go to school and we need to have the highest grade, otherwise we perceive ourselves as less worthy than others. If we play a sport and we don't win, then people, well, why didn't you win, and so on. If you ask somebody out in a date and they say no, well, now you look like a loser. So, you know, but this is fake. It's not real. So I think being raised with all those misconceptions, I mean, you know, you miss anybody who grew up, I think anyway, but primarily, for example, I grew up playing sports, so you always need to be on top of your game, or if you miss a shot, you get...
The sun was in my eye, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, and that translates to every aspect of life, you know. So I think it comes down, the roots of lying comes down from the fear we have of not being enough in the eyes of others. I would say it's basically that, is we believe, and it's rooted in the belief that has been imprinted on us, that we're not enough.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that, because I remember when my son was 4, and he was supposed to do something. He was supposed to pick up his toys, or he was supposed to do something. And my husband knew that he hadn't done it. And so he asked my son, did you pick up your room? And my son knew that the correct answer was yes. That was the answer that Daddy wanted to hear. And so, of course, he said yes. And then my husband got really upset because my son was lying to him. I said, no. I said, because at 4, you that's not possible. But I said, he didn't lie to you. He knew the answer that would please you, so that's what he said. I said, next time ask him why he didn't pick up his toys, not ask him, you know. And again, these are the kinds of questions that you know, we ask these questions and then seem to get really upset when people don't answer us honestly, but we don't necessarily want to know what that answer is, right? I mean, this is kind of part of what you were talking about, that we want to please people. We want them to like us.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think you make a very good point, because usually it starts at home. It starts with us growing up wanting to please our parents or our caregivers, whoever that is. So because we learn, and this is wrong, but we learn the answers that will please them, and then we project those wounds that we have, and we gradually create this feeling of insecurity, and it's almost like we invalidate ourselves by looking for validation from others. So we learn this at home. I mean, we all learn it since we're kids. You know, we want to go out and our parents won't let us, so we lie. We say we're going to go study, but we're not studying, you know. And this is pretty normal for a child, but what it's really doing is creating very unhealthy habits. So I believe that once we are aware of why we're doing what we're doing, then we can begin to change it. But the root is usually in childhood, and on that, and that, I would say, longing.
Well, and it is tough because it does roll into our relationships, because if we learn, because I think what I'm hearing you say, and I know that we're going to talk about this later because it's one of the steps you talk about, but it's this idea that we have to fit a certain picture in order to have, you know, in order to be valued. And so we will strive, you know, and you can see this in all kinds of areas where people are not being their real selves because they're afraid that they won't be accepted. I mean, and you know, the teenage years are all about that. You know, we want to be accepted by these people, and it's and so, you know, to me that's the ultimate lie. It's when we are actually lying to ourselves about who we are and what matters to us. Is that even close to what you're talking about here, this radical transparency?
Of course. I mean, I think so. Society, and this varies depending on which way we're raised and where we grow up and all of that. But basically, there's this picture of what is accepted depending on the segment of society that you grew up in. But if you play by those rules, you'll never be enough. You know, you'll never be wealthy enough, strong enough, smart enough. I mean, whatever's worshipped and validated in the circle that you're a part of. If you strive to live by those rules, you'll always be lying, because you'll always try to overplay yourself to get this acceptance. So
you say that the first step to becoming transparent is to pause. So what makes this important, and how can someone develop this habit, especially like in the moment when they're confronted with wanting to lie about something?
Yeah, well, all of that becomes a habit, and those habits become your default settings. So if you don't pause, then those default settings are always responding, and those default settings lie because you've trained them to lie. Or whoever, the environment, whatever, I mean, it's been trained to lie. So the moment you pause, you break them. The moment you pause, you stop responding by your default settings, and you can actually question, well, what's going on here? What am I actually going to say? Is that true? And you can just, when you pause, you break that chain of thoughts that cause you to respond a certain way. And the first thing to do, I mean, it's hard initially because we're used and we are part of a world, especially now with technology and I mean a lot of wonderful advances, but you know, everybody expects us to respond immediately to everything.
Yeah.
So it's sometimes it's hard to break the cycle and to remind ourselves that we don't actually have to respond immediately. We don't actually have to. I mean, there's no rule that says we have to do that, you know, but it's so hardwired. So,
yes. Okay, so here's what I mean, because, you know, we are so hardwired, like you say, to answer immediately. And whether it's the text message that comes through or our partner sitting across the table or our kid wanting an answer I remember my kids used to, Mom, I need an answer right now. And it's like, well, if you need the answer right now, it's going to be no. I need some time to think about this. So it is about forming a new habit. It is about just taking a moment. And I would say just take one, even if you just took one breath in that pause, that might be enough. But so is it really that simple just to take a beat, take a breath, just get in the habit of before answering or before opening our mouths, even if it's something that we want to ask, to just take a moment and breathe? Is it really that simple?
Well, the first step, that's the first step, and it can be. And once your habit become a habit, it can be, because you train. We can rewire our brains. We can rewire our default settings, just said.
Mm-hmm.
So the more we do it, the easier it gets, because it just becomes your new you,
mm-hmm.
so to say.
Okay.
So it's and it just starts. As you said, sometimes you just need first to ask for time. We take a breath, we pause, and instead of rushing an answer that we're going to regret,
mm-hmm.
we can say, okay, I cannot tell you right now. Give me a moment.
Mm-hmm.
And you use that moment to connect to your heart and to know, which is the next part.
Right.
You feel what's being asked, or you feel the situation, and you then can question whatever comes up. Why, if you want to say, let's say, and I think this is something we know instinctively, but at least in my case, we know that intuitively we know what we need to do, but
mm-hmm.
our heads are very fast. So then they start getting in the way with all kinds of stuff.
Yes.
And usually they're successful in sabotaging our feelings, and we end up second-guessing ourselves and taking the answer that maybe this person believes is right or the other person believes is right, but if you look at it, if you question a lot of those things that come up, you'll see that most likely they're based on all kinds of fears that you have. So it's then, engaging in all that process is really life-changing. But it all starts with a breath. It all starts with a pause. It all starts with you allowing the space to help it happen, to let it happen.
And I love that.
On the go, it's just, if you're on the rush all the time, it's very hard to,
Yeah, it's hard for a lot of reasons. So this is Happily Ever After is just the beginning on webtalkradio.net. I'm Leslie Dories, and I'm having a really important discussion about the importance of becoming radically transparent with author Javier Ortega Ariza. And if you find yourself confused by the contradictory suggestions to be authentic and to be nice, you're not alone. Telling less than the complete truth is something that most of us do, but it actually harms us and our relationships. And if you're holding back in your marriage, it's going to suffer. Knowing how to be gently honest is a skill that you can learn. And if you're interested in how to do that, I invite you to take a moment and send me an email or give me a call and schedule your free, no obligation, Create Your Happily Ever After strategy session. You can reach me by email at Leslie, Lesli, at foundationscoachingnc.com. That's FOUNDATIONS, coaching, N as in Nancy, C as in Charlie.com. Or you can reach me by phone at area code 919-924-0463. Again, that's 919-924-0463. And I want to get back to this conversation about 3 ways to become radically transparent. So, Javier, you say that the second step is to question your intentions. So what is this? What does questioning one's intentions look like, and what makes it important?
Yeah, so I'm going to recommend a book where I'm sure people can find a lot more about this just in case they want to expand. It's called The Seat of the Soul by Gary Zukav. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Mm-hmm. I am.
But
mm-hmm.
Basically, it's based on the premise that every action is preceded by an intention. And if we analyze it, I mean, the intention is either rooted in love or it's rooted in fear. Mm-hmm. So if I'm going to agree to go to a party tonight, why? What's my intention behind going to that party? Is it engaging with my friends? Is it seeing somebody I haven't seen in a long time? Or is it to make sure that my friends still approve of me, even though I really don't want to go? Mm-hmm. Or is it trying to network with somebody that's there to try to get ahead? Like, why are you doing what you're doing? If you're agreeing to something, is it a genuine yes, or is it something that's rooted in the fear of not being loved or approved of by the person who's asking?
That's such a critical thing, because we frequently do things without understanding, why am I doing this? What am I hoping to achieve, whether it's to get a positive reaction or to avoid an unpleasant one.
Totally, exactly. And I think that creates when we are aware of that, it creates a very critical tipping point in a decision making. Because let's say you pursue a relationship, and do you love that person, or is it that you're just afraid of being alone? Or if you need, I mean, in my case, for example, this is something I've developed over time, but in the past, at the first sign of trouble, I'm the type of person who would run away. So if you're going to leave a relationship, what's the intention behind it? Is it because you're not being valued, you're not being respected? Is it the genuine reason to leave? Or is it because you're afraid of letting your stuff be seen? So is it because you're afraid of showing who you really are, and you feel that you're not going to be approved of for who you really are?
Well, it's interesting that you point this out, because I talk to my clients a lot about why somebody is agreeing to something that their partner is asking for. And a lot of times people, quote-unquote, agree. They don't really agree, but they say yes because they're afraid that their partner is going to be disappointed or mad at them or some other not pleasant experience, or they don't want to have a fight, or they want to stop a fight. They want to end some unpleasantness. And so they agree to something, but then just in that agreement, which isn't based in truth, then they have to live, either they have to follow through on something which they don't want to do, or they don't follow through, which then doesn't help either. So it sounds like that if you can stop and figure out the why that you're going to do something, it makes it clarifies things for you.
Totally. And I think also something very important that, I mean, as the person who answers, we need to be very aware of what's motivating our answer. But if we go a step back, then we can also see that a lot of, and this is not to blame somebody else. I mean, we need to take responsibility for what we say and what we do, and this hopefully sheds some light on how to do it. But if you go a step back, it's usually because the way people ask for things is also very poor. The communication skills of more people are passively very violent. They do the guilt trip or the shaming, or so it's almost like people feel they need to persuade somebody of doing something. While if you look at things from a higher perspective, there's no persuasion. It's either yes or no, and it's either a love-driven yes, or it's something that just doesn't align with you. So if we learn, this is something also to look at, like how are we asking for what we need, and how can we do that in a non-violent way so that we will open the channel to get better answers. I feel this way, I need this, please, thank you. And the other person is completely free to say no.
Yes.
So,
absolutely.
But we're not used to that. We're so guilty, And again, it all starts with little things. We go to somebody's house and we don't like their food, but we eat it because we don't want to make them feel bad. But the truly kind thing to do is just to be honest, and in a kind, compassionate way. Maybe it's something I don't. Yeah.
And I think that's the trick, because I talk about, like I said in the beginning, I'm a proponent of radical honesty, not brutal honesty. Uh-huh. There is never any reason to be unkind to somebody.
Totally.
But we aren't taught how to do that in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And, so it's easier just, and again, this is, the little white lie, the lie that's told to spare somebody's feelings, like, I don't really like this food, and it may not be anything in the way it was prepared. I just may not care for the spice level, or, my daughter's funny. She's one of those people who has, whose cilantro tastes like soap to her. So she's not going to like anything with cilantro in it, because it tastes just like she might as well be eating a bar of soap. And so it's not a personal attack on the person. It's just sharing some information. But it's hard because, we don't want to disappoint these people. We like them.
Yes, no, I agree. And we it's hard to do something that you believe will make somebody feel bad. But yeah, if we do it with from a place of kindness, and we are able to, here's where nonviolent communication becomes very important, because you're coming out of your heart instead of. I'm like you. I like radical honesty, but I don't like brutal honesty. There's no reason to be rude or disrespectful to anybody ever. So,
but again, that's a skill. So I want to go to the last step, because this is one that I think many people struggle with, and I know that I do. And your last step is to remember that your own worthiness is unconditional, and that no event can affect it. So, which sounds really great in theory, but how do we do this?
Yeah, well, I think, and from what I've seen, from my personal experience dealing with that, and from what I've seen in almost everybody I know, I think that's one of the main wounds that we're here to heal. That's one of the main challenges we're here to overcome, because it's hard. Because having other people validate us, when they validate us, it feels good. And we are social creatures. We naturally crave for external love and appreciation. So it's very easy to get attached, but in reality, if we're able to do this, if we're able to remember that we're worthy no matter what happens, everything flows so much better. And we end up getting better results most of the time, because we're not pressured, we're not filled with anxiety, we're not filled with fear that somebody might not like us anymore, or that this thing is going to go wrong and my whole life is going to be a disaster. So I learned this question from a former therapist, that whenever I was scared about something, or anybody was scared about something, let's say, so I'll give you a personal example. It's related to something I shared in the article, and I had another experience like this recently. I'm a tennis coach, among the various things I do, and I actually incorporate a lot of mindfulness and personal growth stuff into the training.
Mm-hmm.
And I was playing a match the other day, and I was losing.
Mm-hmm.
And I was losing against somebody I was supposed to beat, but for some reason I was losing.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up in a very competitive household and very competitive circumstances. And losing was always, I guess, in my circle, losing was always looked down upon. So
of course,
there's that part of me that still needs to heal and make peace with the fact that it's a natural part of what happens if you play any game.
Mm-hmm.
So I pay attention to the thoughts that come up. Okay, what's going to happen? What's my worst fear in this situation?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And maybe my worst fear is what people are going to say if they find out I lose.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe my worst fear is that my clients no longer want to hire me to give him lessons because now he can beat me.
Right.
Or maybe it's that somebody will say, oh, he's such a bad pro, whatever. It doesn't matter. But let's say there's 3 examples that might be real.
Mm-hmm.
But then you take a step forward, and there are 2 key questions that you make. And a lot of it, I mean, you can find a lot about this, for example, in the work by Byron Katie. That's a very good resource to help you work through this. Is it true? That's the first step. Is it
Mm-hmm.
true that I'm going to be less worthy of a player or a coach if I lose this match?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not. I mean, Roger Federer loses matches. Rafael Nadal loses matches. They're the 2 best players in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Is their status as some of the greatest players in history challenged because they lost a match? Not at all. So we place a lot of value on the short term because we get scared. Oh, I'm going to lose this. But then, okay, so let's say the worst fear happens and that client no longer hires me. And
Mm-hmm.
is it true? Maybe it's not true. But if it was, why is that bad? Maybe he needs to move on. Maybe he needs to find another trainer. When we eliminate that attachment,
Mm-hmm.
that's the
Yes.
fear. You're able to play pressure-free. You're able to just have fun, and you're able to give it your best, and you're at peace because there's nothing to lose. You realize it's all a thought, it's all an illusion, pretty
Mm-hmm.
much that you're holding on to something that cannot be held. And when you realize that, you liberate yourself. You're able to come out onto the court or to your work, your relationship, whatever you want to do, and come out from a place of wholeheartedness because it's you. Your fears have been freed. Yeah.
Well, and I do like that because it is this idea, and for a long time I struggled with the concept of unconditional love. That I thought this doesn't really exist. That if it exists, the only place it exists is parent to child. And then as I've done some learning, it is really unconditional love is about how we feel about ourselves, that we are worthy just because we are. And it's what I tell my clients. And I was like, okay, I need to learn this lesson too. That there's no baby that needs to do something to be valued and loved. They just are. But somehow we get that twisted around, and this idea that, and again, unconditional love doesn't mean that every behavior that I engage in is acceptable behavior, but that me as a person is acceptable. And it's a hard thing. And I love the idea of you're talking about letting go of the outcome, because that's it to me goes to that whole idea of trying to hold water or sand in your hands. The tighter you close your fist, the more you're going to lose. But if you can just leave your hand open and not, and not grab onto and grab tightly to this one outcome that has to exist of the multitudinous outcomes out there, we then create what we're afraid of. And that's really where it all goes sideways.
Yeah, totally. The more you hold on to something, the more you lose it. Like, if your worthiness depends on somebody's approval, then subconsciously you're going to be looking for that approval all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And most likely you're not going to get it. You might get it temporarily, but as soon as you don't get it, as soon as there's a sign that you don't have it, you go crazy.
Well, and also there's the story that you tell yourself that the reason why I'm not getting this is about me, not about the other person, which again is the other half of this, that, you know, that my partner may be having a bad day and I didn't have anything, you know, it's not because he's upset with me. He's, you know, something unpleasant happened at work. You know.
Totally. And most of the times it's that way.
Yeah. But and again, I think that what you're talking about, that first taking that pause, that breath, then questioning our intention. So it's like, do I have the intention that this has to go my way? That, you know, and then what is that about? So I love these 3 steps that, of course, are you know, taught in so many ways and in so many different avenues. You know, you talked about using it in your teaching tennis, which of course, you know, you'll see these new kids, you know, the new players come up, and they have nothing to lose, so they play with joy and abandon, and sometimes they win.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, because technically they shouldn't win, right? Because but because they don't have a stake in it.
Yeah,
you know, they
exactly.
can think. Yeah. Oh, I love this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the higher you stake, I mean, the more, and the higher the attachment to your stake, I would say. It's the more fearful you get. I mean, you get tight, you stop playing well, you try to win at all costs. You know, you might call a ball out here and there. You know, I mean, I see all kinds of behaviors, but it's all motivated by the same fear. The better you get, am I still going to be enough if I lose this game? The answer is yes, but it's hard to find if you don't look for it. So.
That's true. Well, Javier, thank you so much for coming on and talking about what, you know, is such an important, and honestly, it's a freeing topic. When people can do this, life gets easier and better, whatever that would look like for anybody, because you're in the moment and you're not contemplating gloom and doom. So where can people learn more about you and read more of your stuff? Because, by the way, guys, you're just talking to him, but go read this article. He's a fantastic writer. I love good writers. So,
Thank you. Well, I mean, I write a lot on Medium, for example. I can be found as JOA, my initials, and then the word publishing. So JOA Publishing. You can find many articles there. I write a lot and about numerous different topics, but a lot related to this process of spiritual growth, personal growth and development, and how that impacts every aspect of her life. And my email can be found there as well. So if anybody wants to connect, I'd be grateful and happy to connect over there as well, and happy to be of help.
Oh, absolutely, because being completely honest can feel really scary. And it's quite true that other people may not like or appreciate your radical transparency. But the one person you always are with is you. And when you live in alignment with that person, those around you will be able to fully trust you as well. And the key thing to remember is that you have the ability to be gently but unapologetically honest. So the question is, will you? And hopefully you found this show interesting and you will continue to listen. And until next week, stay loving.